Hey everyone! Ready to dive into the world of long-distance love and how to keep those emotional connections strong even when you're miles apart.
It sounds exciting.
It is. And we've got some awesome insights to share today from the Heartfelt Connections podcast,
Yeah.
specifically their episode on navigating emotional needs in long-distance relationships.
Oh, and that's a good one.
It is. So, long-distance relationships often feel like a roller coaster
Oh, yeah.
with all that excitement and loneliness and anxiety and of course, love.
It's like all the feels just amplified. And actually, that ties in perfectly with what I found fascinating about this episode. They really highlight how important emotional intimacy is in any relationship.
Right.
That feeling of being connected, understood, and truly seen by your partner.
Yeah.
It's essential, but distance can make it feel even, I don't know, like more crucial or something.
Definitely. It's like the stakes are higher when you're not physically together all the time.
Yeah, totally.
And the podcast doesn't just leave us hanging with all those feelings, though.
Right.
They actually dive into some seriously practical tips.
They do.
Yeah.
And it's like they don't shy away from the simple stuff either.
Oh, like what?
Like those regular check-ins we all know we should be doing.
Right.
They actually go into why those are so vital for a long-distance relationship.
It's like a reminder that you're both still in this together.
Exactly. It's like a heartbeat for the relationship.
Makes sense.
But they also remind us to mix it up, keep things lively with, texts, calls, video chats.
Yeah, like not letting things get stale.
Exactly. Keep things fresh, keep it interesting.
And on that note, you know what really stood out to me? That tip about sharing those small everyday moments.
Oh, yeah, I loved that one.
At first I was like, really? Will that actually make a difference?
Yeah, it seems so insignificant.
Right. But then I thought about it. When we're physically present with someone, those little details are what connect us.
Totally.
So why should it be any different when we're apart?
It shouldn't. And actually, there's like real science behind it.
What is there?
Yeah. Think about those little inside jokes you share with your partner.
Yeah.
They're only funny because of certain shared experiences,
Uh-huh.
right? So when you're sending a photo of, I don't know, like your crazy morning commute or a funny sign you saw, you're still building that shared history, even from a distance.
Yeah, it's like you're still creating memories together.
You are. And it all adds up to this feeling of we're in the same world, even if we're not in the same room.
I like that.
Me too.
And speaking of shared experiences, the podcast also got me thinking about virtual date nights.
Oh, yeah, those are important.
Because it's so easy to just like default to texting or calling.
Oh, for sure.
But they make a good argument for putting more effort into those virtual hangouts.
Making them intentional.
Right. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm all about it because you're tapping into some pretty cool psychology there.
Really?
Yeah, even when you're doing something virtually together, like watching a movie together online.
Or like having dinner together over video chat.
Exactly. Your brain is still releasing oxytocin,
Which is?
the bonding hormone.
Yeah.
So you're not just having fun, you're actually strengthening your connection on a chemical level.
So it's not just me being all lovey-dovey when I say those virtual dates make me feel closer to my partner.
Nope. It's science.
I love it when science backs me up. Now, the podcast also emphasized open communication, which I'm always a fan of.
Me too.
And I loved this idea they had about keeping a shared journal.
Interesting.
Have you ever tried that?
I haven't personally, but I can see the appeal.
Yeah.
Because for some people, it's really tough to, express their deepest feelings out loud.
Yeah, vulnerability can be scary.
It can. But writing those feelings down can feel safer, less pressure. And then when you share that journal with your partner, it's like this space for real intimacy, even when you're not physically together.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's like a secret emotional language just for the two of you.
Okay, so we've got communication covered, shared experiences. What else did the podcast say was essential for that long-distance emotional bond?
Well, they brought up something that might seem small, but it can really make a big difference.
What's that?
Celebrating milestones.
Oh, even the small ones.
Yeah, like a work achievement, a birthday, or even just like a small anniversary of when you first started dating.
Why do you think that's so important when you're in a long-distance relationship?
Because it really counteracts that fear of being forgotten or overlooked.
Which can be a real struggle in long distance.
It can. So celebrating those milestones, no matter how small, is like this tangible reminder that you're a priority in your partner's life, even when you're not physically present.
It's like saying, hey, even though I'm not there, I'm still thinking about you and celebrating your wins.
Exactly.
And that can go a long way in maintaining that closeness, right?
Absolutely. It's those small gestures that speak volumes in long-distance relationships. Yeah, they really do make all the difference. It really is the thought that counts, especially when you're miles apart, you know.
Hmm.
And speaking of things that really matter in long-distance relationships, the Heartfelt Connections podcast also talked about trust.
Oh, trust.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
it is. It's like the foundation of any relationship,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. But I can see how distance could make that even harder.
Oh, absolutely. When you're not seeing each other all the time, it's way easier for doubts and anxieties to creep in.
Ugh. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Right. Like maybe your partner's been a little less communicative than usual.
Or they miss a call.
Exactly. In a
Snap.
normal situation, you probably wouldn't think twice about it.
But when there are all those miles between you.
Your mind can really start to go into overdrive.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So what's the solution? Just tell your partner every little anxious thought that pops into your head.
Well, that's where it gets a little tricky, right? Because there's a balance to find.
Yeah,
You don't want to overwhelm them with every worry,
right.
but you also don't want to bottle things up.
So what did the podcast suggest?
They really emphasize transparency,
Hmm.
like sharing your feelings and concerns openly.
But in a healthy way.
Exactly. In a way that invites connection instead of creating more distance.
So instead of saying like, hey, you've been so distant lately, what's going on?
Right, which can sound kind of accusatory.
It's more about saying, hey, I've noticed we haven't connected as much this week and I miss you. Is everything okay?
Yeah, much better.
Mm.
It's about being vulnerable without placing blame.
And that actually builds trust.
It does, because you're basically saying, I trust you enough to share my vulnerabilities with you.
I like that.
And that can create a stronger foundation for intimacy.
It's like you're inviting your partner into your emotional world, even when you're physically apart.
That's a great way to put it. And you know, that makes me think about another point the podcast made about setting shared goals.
Oh, yeah, goals. I can see how that would be important for trust, too.
Definitely. When you have shared goals, whether it's planning a visit or working towards living in the same city someday, or even just dreaming about future adventures together,
Yeah.
you're creating this sense of shared purpose.
Like you're both working towards something meaningful together.
Exactly. Even if the path is a little winding right now.
And that can help with the anxiety of being long distance.
It can. It reinforces that feeling of we're in this together, which is so important.
Totally. But even with the best communication and shared goals, there are still going to be times when you feel lonely.
Right.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. That's the reality of long distance. The podcast talked about that, too.
And it's something a lot of people struggle with, I think. That feeling of isolation can be tough.
It can be really intense, especially when you're physically separated from the person you want to be closest to.
So what did they recommend for dealing with those lonely moments?
Well, their advice was actually pretty simple, but I think that's what makes it so effective.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
They emphasize staying active, pursuing hobbies you love, and nurturing your other social connections.
Like self-care, right?
Exactly. It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that the only way to combat loneliness is to be constantly connected to your partner.
Yeah, like you have to be talking all the time to make up for the distance.
Right. But that can actually backfire. When you neglect your own needs and interests, you end up feeling drained and maybe even resentful.
Which isn't good for anyone.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
So it's not about ignoring the loneliness. It's about finding healthy ways to cope with it that nourish you as an individual.
So you can show up as your best self in the relationship.
Exactly.
Right.
By filling your own cup, so to speak, you're actually bringing more energy and positivity to the relationship.
That's a great way to look at it. And it leads perfectly into another question the podcast addressed. What do you do when your partner seems distant?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Because, let's be real, it happens in every relationship. But it can feel extra stressful when you're already dealing with the physical distance.
Oh, for sure. It's so easy to jump to conclusions when you're feeling insecure.
Yeah, your mind goes to all the worst case scenarios.
Totally.
Yeah.
But the podcast made a really important point. Distance can sometimes just magnify those little differences in communication styles.
So just because my partner is a little quieter than usual doesn't necessarily mean they're pulling away.
Exactly. It could simply be their way of coping with the challenges of the situation.
Like maybe they're just stressed about work or something.
Right. It's important to remember that everyone processes emotions differently, and what feels like distance to you might not be intentional on their part at all.
So what's the best approach when you do notice that shift in communication? just ignore it and hope it goes away.
Well, I wouldn't recommend ignoring it,
Mhm.
but I also wouldn't jump to accusations. Remember what we talked about earlier?
Transparency.
Yes. Transparency and vulnerability. Reach out to your partner. Share how you're feeling and ask them how they're doing.
It always comes back to communication, huh? But sometimes I think we overcomplicate things.
What do you mean?
Well, we get so focused on communicating effectively all the time that we forget to just have fun.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, the Heartfelt Connections podcast did touch on that a little when they were talking about virtual date nights.
Yeah.
But even beyond like scheduled dates, I think it's so important to find ways to be more spontaneous and playful.
Right. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in all the logistics of long-distance planning calls, coordinating visits,
Yeah.
that you forget to just enjoy each other's company.
Exactly. It's like the relationship becomes all about managing the distance instead of actually nurturing the connection.
Ugh,
Yeah.
yeah. So how do we fix that? How do we keep things fun and lighthearted even when we're miles apart?
Well, I think it starts with remembering that fun doesn't have to be these big grand gestures, you know?
Right.
It's often the small, unexpected things that bring the most joy.
Like what?
Like sending your partner a funny meme that made you think of them or starting a silly inside joke over text.
Or even just surprising them with a quick video call.
Yes, it's like those little
Yeah.
bursts of connection that can really keep the spark alive.
I love that. And I think it's also important to be open to trying new things together, even if it's something you can only do virtually.
Oh, totally.
Like taking an online cooking class together or playing a game online.
Yeah, find those shared experiences that bring you joy, even if you can't be in the same place physically.
Exactly. And that's something we can all work on no matter how long we've been doing the long distance thing. So if you have any tips for keeping things fun in your own long distance relationship, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, definitely. Head over to our social media and share your wisdom.
Because let's be real, we're all in this together.
We are.
And that's kind of the beauty of it, right? Even though long distance can be challenging, knowing that others are going through those same ups and downs can make it feel a little less daunting.
For sure.
So if you're listening and you're in a long distance relationship, remember, you're not alone. And with a little creativity and a whole lot of heart, you can keep those emotional connections strong no matter how many miles are between you.